So hello, everybody. I can just see people are starting to filter through as I speak. So I'm going to get things kick-started. And first, I'm going to start with a good afternoon or morning, depending on where you are joining us in the world. I myself am currently in London, and it is a very sunny day here, which I'm super excited about. And I'm also super excited about our talk today, which is all around accessibility, why all developers need to know about it and understand it, and how you can start to build products that people can actually use. Now, for those who joined us a couple of weeks ago for our masterclass with Mira and David on UX, you'll remember we did touch upon the subject of accessibility, but we're going to be diving into that much further with our technology lead, Ramon. So just before I pass on to him, I've got a few introductory and house rule slides to go through. This will also just give a chance for any late joiners to come on board before we get into the main section of today's webinar. So firstly, if you're new to CyberDuck and new to our webinars, welcome. It's always great to have new faces. A little bit of background to who we are. So we are actually Laravel's first official UK accredited partner. And if you were to ask us, why do we do what we do? Well, we're super passionate about redesigning and rebuilding websites, digital products and services so they can be more user-friendly, more accessible, and served by better technology like Laravel. And hopefully you can see on this slide here a few of the different clients that we've worked with over the years, from NHS to Bosch to Sport England. Great clients have got fantastic stories there, so you can check those out on our website. And that leads us nicely into this series of webinars that we've started. So we've been around now for over 18 years, and actually collectively, if you took all of our experience, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of years. And over the years, we've been building up processes, expertise, knowledge, and really we want to share it with the wider world, and particularly with developers who are looking to grow and elevate their skills outside of pure development. So what we've been doing is running these masterclass webinars where we sort of focus on a different stage of the project lifecycle. As I said already, the other week we were talking all about UX. Today's about accessibility, and going forward we'll have talks on areas such as QAing and kind of working together with multiple teams. So some really exciting talks coming up. If you ever can't make a session, please do not worry. We upload all of these webinars to YouTube. So we have a playlist there, so you can always catch up with them. And every now and then we may share with you an additional piece of material when it's relevant to the topic we're talking about, such as an article, a previous webinar, or maybe even a white paper. And I think I've just got two more slides to go through. So firstly, just in terms of today's session, we've got about 40 minutes booked out for the full session. There'll be time at the end of the presentation today for any questions you may have for Ramon. If you want to ask him a question, the best way to do this is using the Q&A function. So if you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see a little Q&A button. Click that and it will pop open. And if you have to drop off for any reason during the session, please do not worry. As I said already, we'll upload the video onto YouTube and we'll make sure that's emailed out to you early next week. And look, we love seeing your social media content as well. So feel free to put out a tweet or post on LinkedIn. And if you use the hashtag LaraDuck, we'll be able to pick up on that and engage with you there. And I've got one last slide to talk about, which is just around captioning. So captions are available if you need them. These are not already turned on. You can switch these on via the transcript button located at the bottom of your screen. And these are just automated captions, and we know that they're good, but they're not perfect. So we do make sure that the on-demand version of our webinar will be provided with manually edited captions as well. And that's it from me for now. So I'm going to say a big hello to Ramon. Firstly, I guess, how are you doing today? And yeah, let's get started.
So yeah, let's go. I'm going to start by introducing myself. I am a front-end developer and technical lead at CyberDuck, because I've been with CyberDuck for about 12 years now. I sit kind of in between the, obviously for front end, but reviewing from the design and planning of the implementation of the back end. So I'm in a very good position to review everything that relates to accessibility in our projects. And it's been a wonderful last few years that I've been getting myself involved with accessibility and seeing how the efforts have really benefit people from all walks of life to use our products. It is very rewarding. So quickly, let's have a quick view of what is accessibility. It's basically the practice of making sure that the information that we provide is inclusive to everybody by removing the barriers that may make that information difficult to access for certain people. This can come in all kinds of different ways. When we talk about e-accessibility or digital accessibility, is when all of these practices are applied to digital products, websites, applications, etc. And before we actually start talking about all this content, I wanted to show this video so you see how some of the accessibility issues actually affect people in the real world. So let's have a quick look at this.
Hi there, this is Yahya. I am a visually impaired user, so I use a screen reader called JAWS, and I use the Windows operating system to navigate on websites. So at the moment, I'm on this website of Airbnb. So I'm just going to take you through what I do normally. So now I'm on the home screen page. I will just be using keyboard shortcuts. I don't use mouse whatsoever. And I use, for example, a letter F. It takes me to the field. So it says a location. So it brought Dubai already because I was experimenting with it before. And what happened is that we get to a stage where we're trying to find. Okay, so we get to a stage where we're trying to find the calendar for me to input the dates. And it's classical accessibility issue where the dates are and the numbers are not accessible. So you cannot go through them properly. The calendar doesn't pop up in the inaccessible way, like a combo box that allows you to smoothly select the date. So this is a classical issue I'm facing with so many different websites.
So one of the biggest challenges when using the internet as a dyslexic person is being able to read text clearly, particularly on content-heavy sites such as the Daily Mail. So this is the homepage, for example. And if we scroll down, you can see there's a lot of text here. The text looks slightly jumbled and it's quite difficult to read. And if you want to know how that feels, you can use sites and plugins like Geon, which demonstrate this exact experience. So this is Geon, and this is how it feels to a dyslexic person. Now, if you compare the Daily Mail to the BBC, for example, you can see how much clearer and easier that is to read from a content perspective.
Messaging has always been, and still is, the easiest way for me to communicate virtually. However, it is not always appropriate, and for work, I do need other methods to connect with my colleagues. One of the biggest transformations in the recent years has been automated captioning. While it's always not accurate, it has allowed me to take work meetings via Google Meet much easier. I have complete control over switching it on, and it doesn't rely on anyone else in the call to do anything. More recently, Google has brought out automated captioning for phone calls. For the first time, I'm now able to receive and make calls on my phone rather than relying on friends and family members to take the call on my behalf.
Cool. So you see how different aspects of accessibility can affect different people in very different ways. And this is what I wanted to show here in the next slide, which is that accessibility comes in lots of different forms. We usually refer to them as a motor, visual, auditory, verbal, and neurological cognitive issues. And they can affect people either permanent or temporary, depending on the situation that they encounter. I will recommend doing a little bit extra research on here. So you really understand what people with different types of disabilities face every day on the web. So we wanted to make this specific presentation because there is a common misconception about who is responsible for accessibility. And the reality is that everybody that is involved in a project, especially with digital products, everybody is responsible for some parts of the accessibility solutions. So, for example, it started with the research to make sure that we understand who the audience is, then from the design phase and ensuring that everything makes sense logically in terms of the layout, the text, the color combinations, and all of that. Then there's the content writers that they have to make sure that the content is clear and it's not overcomplicated. And then the developer for making the implementation of all of these things, plus a few extra things that need to happen in the development side that we're going to see in a couple of minutes. So let's start digging in with how accessibility affects the development process. And this is going to be important as well to understand how some of the aid technology that people with disabilities use to access your products use the web. One of the main things that we have to understand is that the order and the relationship between the different elements of an application or a website affect the way that people perceive them. Not everybody can read in the same order, like you saw in the video with Siobhan being dyslexic. Sometimes the content appears to her in a different way. Also, when somebody is accessing the website in a screen reader, the screen reader is the one that is going to start reading the different parts of the layout in an order that will make sense to them. That's what we as developers, we need to make sure that when we put the information and the content into a layout, that the layout itself makes sense. The second point is about visual contrast and ensuring that not only the text has a good enough contrast with the background where it sits, but also elements that are actionable, like buttons, links, form fields, and all of that. And how when you get to those elements, say navigating with the keyboard, and they have to highlight themselves and make sure that that highlight has enough contrast for them to understand where they are in the page. The third one is about the description and labeling of elements. Not everything is going to be visible for some people, and sometimes they have to action or focus on an element by clicking on something else, etc. So the relationship between two elements, like say the label of a form field and the form field itself, they have to be tied together so they work together. Description for things like videos and images to people who can't actually see them to understand what the content is, and transcripts, audio description for things that are happening in a video so they can actually get the context on why that video is there and how it can help understand the content better. The same applies, for example, to the form fields themselves and the labels, not only to be tied together in terms of the connection between the two, but also what does it say? Is the label of that form really descriptive of what the field is expecting people to input on that field? And if, for example, if you have a bunch of links on a page, if the links say click here only, and you have 100 links on a page that all say click here, people are not going to know what those links do. And the last one is about reflection of the state of the elements, especially when you have elements that are actionable, like toggable, things that close and open, menus and all that, to programmatically reflect the state of those elements. There's a few things that we're going to see how to represent that. So in terms of ordering relationship, one of the most important things that we have to make sure is the levels of the headings are in a logical order. You cannot be skipping headers, like in the red example here, jumping from an H2 to an H4, because they lose that connection. One important thing to understand about the headings is that it's not only a visual representation of the text itself, it's about belonging. So in this example here, the H2 belongs to the H1, the H3 belongs to the H2. So they are kind of logical sections that work together to indicate what the structure and the hierarchy of the content is. And the other part that is really important in terms of the order and relationship between elements on the site is something called landmarks. The landmarks define the structure, the visual structure of the layout of a document. And we can use landmarks to help people navigate through the different areas of an application. There are different landmarks, say like the header of the page, the main content, a sidebar, the footer, all those are specific landmarks. The navigation is also a landmark, and you can label them to indicate what type of content they have. And people using assistive technologies, they can actually jump between landmarks to position themselves the best way to consume that content and make use of those applications. The next one about the visual contrast, there are a few tools that we use to measure this. The measurement to calculate what the contrast is using a ratio, and there are tons of tools. If you Google for a contrast tool checker, you will find tons of options. This one here is called Pika. It's a free option for Mac. It's very cool because it shows you not only the contrast ratio, but how they apply in compliance to the regulations of accessibility. And very easy to use, very, very useful. Normally, this will apply to designers, but it's important for us as developers to make sure that when we are implementing things, going to start using things in the browser to check that the contrast between different elements is enough for everybody to see. We're aiming for at least a ratio of 4.5 to 1. So you can see in the right-hand side here, this one has 1.43 to 1 is not enough to pass an accessibility regulation. And in terms of the description and labeling of the different elements, basically we just have to make sure that all elements are well described and well labeled, that they make sense when you start using them. Again, an image to have an alt text. That alt text is not just to put the name of the image, it should describe what the content of the image is, so people understand what the image is about if they cannot see it. In terms of the development responsibility in this case, is that we have to make sure that when we create systems, that we are using the correct fields and adding the correct fields to the system, so the content editors can actually add the required information to all of these things. For labels, in form fields, for images, for video, for transcript, audio description, and all those things. Sometimes using the role attribute, I'm going to talk a little bit more about role in a few minutes, to indicate what things are. If you cannot, for example, use a button tag for a control that looks like a button, maybe then add the role with the value of button to that element to make it more descriptive of what its function is. And lastly, the reflection of the state of control. This is really important because this comes in two parts. One, about the focus, to visually indicate the focus of an element, because a lot of people, they cannot use a mouse, so they have to navigate using the keyboard. And the only way for them to know where on the page they are is by looking at what is highlighted as they navigate through the page using the tab key. So that's why it's really important to highlight what elements are in focus as they go through the page. That applies to links, form fields, navigation, buttons, all of those things. And the other part is about ensuring that there is a programmatically added piece of data that indicates the state of the different objects. Like I mentioned before, an accordion, for example, that you click to open and close the content for that accordion item, there are a few attributes that we need to add to those elements so they can represent in which state they are at any point. Some of them are, like, for example, area expanded. with true or false, depending on the state of the element. Area controls that points to an ID of an element that is being toggled with this control. And area level, for example, if you have a close button that closes a dialog, and the only content of that button is an X icon, or using, you know, any of those icon libraries, we should indicate with an area label what that button does, so people know when they land there, either with a mouse or with a screen reader that is announcing the different parts of the content, they can know for sure what does the control do. I wanted to talk a little bit about how to talk about accessibility, you know, making the case for accessibility in digital. This is kind of a delicate topic because for a lot of people, it's kind of hard to sell. Accessibility takes time, takes effort. It takes training, it takes understanding, it takes testing. So it does affect the life cycle of a project. For us, the first step is the right thing to do. We need to make sure that everybody is able to use the product that we build, and that they can actually make use of those sites to improve their lives. Sometimes it can be just as simple as buying something online, but in many cases, it's about being able to use services that they need to have a good life. So in general, yeah, it's the right thing to do, and we really need to consider everybody that may have a disability when we build our digital products. The second thing is about the amount of people. Again, there is a usual misconception that the amount of people with disabilities is just so low that it doesn't really make a case in terms of, you know, financial gain, or how much people will affect if you don't do the work. But the reality is that 20% of the population, at least, some argue that it's up to 25%, live with a disability. And this is, I mean, we're talking 2 billion people in the world and at least 15 million people in the United Kingdom. That's a lot of people who work and live and study and live their lives the same way as everybody else. They have to buy things and use services. So if you're not doing the work of accessibility, you're leaving a big chunk of the population outside. The third thing is that accessibility really helps everybody. We have done studies about this, and there are many studies online that you can find how when we make those efforts and make accessibility fixes and solutions into our digital products, how everybody benefits from them. Because a lot of the times those solutions will lead to a better user experience in general. Another point is that sometimes you have to consider, depending on your industry and your products, that the investment, the acquisition could depend on products being accessible. Not only thinking about the company being acquired by a bigger company, or a product itself being acquired by a company, but also many companies that are just going to be making use of your service or your product. They may have an accessibility requirement by law that will make them choose something else if your product is not accessible. And this is coming more true year to year as the requirements for accessibility are higher and more strict. And lastly, I think this one is a delicate one because it happens a lot more here in the United States, but it's a practice that is growing all over the world. Because of regulations, there are many people and law firms that are using that as a weapon to file lawsuits against companies and services that do not meet accessibility requirements. We have seen this ourselves with some of our clients here and in other parts, and it is a danger. So if you want to protect yourself, depending on your industry, if you are a private company, you may not be as much risk. But what happened to us was with a private client that was at risk of being into a litigation because their website was not accessible. So we had to fix that. But also for products and services that have anything related to public service, government, by law, you are required to make accessible products. So it is a really important topic. So how do we go about implementing accessibility and driving a culture of accessibility in your environment, in your company? I think the first thing and the most important is internal training. Focus the training and the different teams and how they are responsible for the different parts of accessibility. Design is going to have a part on it. Development is going to have a part on it. How even the new business team and marketing teams talk about accessibility with possible clients and the public at large. It's really important to have that training, to understand what accessibility is about, to know what it affects, what it represents for everybody. And by doing that, you're going to be creating a culture in the company around accessibility. People having that in mind, to have it present when they are building the products. And another way to keep that going is, for example, if you have a process of production to include accessibility checklists and things like that into the process, so they are always followed up when developing new products. So in terms of the development specifically, how do you identify what you need to look for? What do you need to do in terms of developing websites and applications? And I'm going to tie this to Laravel a little bit more. Laravel is a very, very flexible framework. It allows you to do pretty much anything. And it has a lot of tools that help with the development process, including things like Blade templates and things like Livewire that help you with interactivity and with like showing data without having to reload the page and things like that. But also there is a lot of external libraries and third-party like plugins and add-ons that you can use with Laravel to help with the development process. So when you are starting to work with accessibility, you have to be really careful about those libraries and how you use all of these tools. For example, if you actually, let me go to the next slide, because one of the first things that I talked about was about layout and ordering. Landmark, for example, that we talked at the beginning, and how the content is ordered across the pages in the applications. You can build, for example, components in Blade or templates that help you use those landmarks in a very consistent way and without having to repeat everything at all times. So make sure that when you make those templates and you start building the layout, the pieces of the layout have the required attributes and labels and all that. If those labels are dynamic, make sure that you add the fields that are required to populate those labels. So each one of those landmarks are correctly identified in the layout. And talking about attributes and events, again, this is about getting the correct fields in terms of having the ability as a content editor to label things properly. Even if that text doesn't show on the page itself, they have to be used in either area labels, in roles, and things like that. So you have to make sure that those fields are available and they are populating the content. Sometimes make them required if you know that those pieces of content have to be there, even if they're not visible. It's important to learn and understand a little bit more about area. I can't talk really much about area here because it's really extends There's tons of different area attributes and roles. It will take us quite a long time to go through all of that, but I would recommend doing a bit of research about area attributes and how they work, when to use them, when not to use them. But also, because I say when not to use them, sometimes it's better to make sure that you're using semantic HTML tags to create things. Using a div with a role button to make an actionable element is not really a good idea. If you can, you're able to actually use the button tag, which is already actionable. You can focus on it with a keyboard. You can navigate to it with using the tab, and they have already built-in focus events and all that. Then use the button. Don't use a div. And so that's the kind of thing that we need to consider around the developments. I was going to mention something else about those actions. Yeah, but I think I have the next one. Oh, yeah, about using third-party libraries. Things like, for example, Tailwind. If you use Tailwind, which is kind of ingrained into Laravel nowadays, Tailwind makes it really easy to create a design without caring too much about what the tags themselves are. So you can make something look like a big title at the top of the page, and it can just be a paragraph tag. That's why it's really important to make sure that we kind of force to use the correct tags, to use the heading tags, to use the landmark tags like article, section, sidebar, and all of those things to organize the content, to make sure that we use things like buttons and links to things that are actionable, and how we use especially the form controls. A lot of the things that we add into content, it's very easy to go off the rails in terms of the different tags that we're using. So it is quite important to really understand the semantics of the HTML elements and how they actually benefit accessibility. And yeah, I think that was all from my side. Did I miss anything? No, all good.
That was brilliant, Ramon. That's it's a lot of information packed into a small space of time, and I know we've done webinars in the past on accessibility, and we struggle with 1 hour. So to get all that into half an hour is brilliant.
That went quicker than I thought, but yeah.
Yeah, I think we get stuck into a few questions, and one that I would like to kind of start with, and it touches upon some things you've already spoken about. You know, we've done panels on accessibility in the past, and one of the most common things we hear is that, you know, people say, you know, they need to challenge their stakeholders or managers around the topic of them going, well, disabled users aren't our target market, they're not our, you know, audience. So, you know, maybe thinking about the ways that you've interacted with other companies in the past, you know, how do you speak to them when they say something like, well, we're not worried about disabled users because we're not targeting them?
Well, the quick answer is you cannot possibly know that. People with disabilities, they are active members of society in all different levels. So yeah, they are going to be part of your target, no matter what your industry is, no matter what the product is, they are going to be part of your audience. So yeah, they are there, and believe me, they're more than you may think.
Yeah, no, I think that's different. And again, when we talk about accessibility, you know, I think as well, lots of people think about accessibility and they think about screen readers and things like that, which obviously is important, a very important part of it. But, you know, accessibility is such a you know, a broad subject and broad skill now as well.
Yes, that's why I wanted to show the slide at the beginning, where it shows the different parts of accessibility. Somebody can, I mean, things that nobody really thinks about, like having an injury for a car accident that temporarily you can't use one arm. even carrying a baby for a while. You can't use one hand, you're busy with a baby. That is a temporary disability that will affect how you use the web. But yeah, probably blindness is one of the most common because of the screen readers. There's a lot of talk about the screen readers, but yeah, dyslexia, color blindness, and some other types of visual impairments that are not blindness will make people use the web in a different way. The motor disabilities are a big one, that people cannot use a mouse, or they have to depend on some other types of technology to navigate the web. And like that, cognitive autism, different languages, how they understand the web, etc. All of those things affect how people navigate the web. So it's really important to understand, the different parts and the different types of accessibility there are.
That's great answer. Another thing we touched on a lot at CyberDuck, and it'd be good to get your thoughts on, is around overlay solutions like Accessibility. I guess for anyone watching today, what are your thoughts on these, solutions? Are they good, or are they bad?
That really good question, Daniel, because another misconception of accessibility and an error that a lot of people fall into is the thinking that accessibility solutions are something that they can just patch at the end of the project. We build the whole thing, and we can do this little quick fixes at the end, and everything is going to be good. And that's not the case. Accessibility needs to be ingrained in the whole process from the start. Solutions like Accessibility and those like toolbars that aim to fix accessibility issues, one, they never fully make a site compliant with accessibility, especially for sites that are regulated by law or required by law to be accessible. Those tools are not going to help you. You're going to be paying a lot of money for them, and they are going to leave holes behind. And secondly, it's a dangerous, in my mind, it's a dangerous way of thinking about accessibility. That idea that you can just patch something at the end and just be done with it, it really doesn't work. The work has to be done across the whole life cycle of a project to be effective.
Yeah, that's a perfect answer to that. I have another really great question here, which is, can accessibility help with energy sustainability by letting sort of non-disabled users find things faster with fewer reloads and scrolling, etc.?
Yeah, I haven't actually faced this question before, but absolutely. By making the web easier to use for everybody, we're definitely helping by cascading that effort to the environment. One of the main things that we do as developers and as a digital transformation company is, little by little, tiny details, you improve the efficiency of how the digital products are made and how they are going to be used and understood by the users. Those tiny details, they add up to people doing things faster, more efficiently, using less time, less energy. And in terms of accessibility, that is a big one, because sometimes it's a person cannot use a digital product to use a service to pay their gas bill, electric bill, or things like that. They may have to go to a place physically to pay for that service, which they couldn't do online. If they can do it online, the amount of energy, time, and effort used to make use of those services is going to be greatly reduced. And it sounds like it's little, but again, when there's millions of people doing it, it really helps.
It's a great answer to that as well. I'm going to finish up, I think, just on one more question, which is, I guess, for everyone here today, how can they get started on testing, for instance, their website for accessibility? Are there tools or processes you would suggest to get the ball rolling?
Yeah, there's two things that I think that people can use to start. Well, three actually. The the third one, but probably one of the most important, is look at videos, come to webinars like this where there's information, discussions, and learning about it. Because the first thing is that, yeah, you have to learn what it is, how it affects people, and how to work with it. But the two things that people, I think, can use in practice are checklist. There's a few things that you can find online. We can probably add them here in the presentation when we deliver it. Checklists that can help the project life cycle to have accessibility present. Those checklists are like industry standards. They're easy to follow. And sometimes they will require you to do a little bit of research in terms of understanding what they are requiring you to do. But it's a good start into helping you like put the pieces in place to get the products being as accessible as possible. The other thing is there are tools for the browser and some online tools that will help you with testing. The Google Chrome Inspector itself is an accessibility tester. If you do, if you go to the, can't remember the name of that tab at the end of the inspector, it does test for performance, for best practices, any test for accessibility. Lighthouse, that's what it's called. The Lighthouse tester. That is a really good tool because it's going to give you what the errors are, and it's actually going to show you how to fix those errors with links to resources that are going to help you fix those issues. But there are others like the Wave extension for Chrome. That is a really good tool that, again, not only shows you where the errors are with the different tags and everything is pointed out really clearly, but it also explains what the errors are, why they are appearing, and gives you like resources on how to solve those issues as well. There are a few ones. If you look in the Chrome extension store, accessibility tester, accessibility checker, you can do a search like that and it's going to show you. The main one that we use are probably Wave and the Lighthouse testing tool. There's a lot of manual tests that can do as well, but that obviously requires a little bit more knowledge and how to interpret the different issues that may arise during development. So I recommend going to automated tools at the beginning.
It's a great answer, and I'm sure that's very useful to everyone who's joined us. So I think we'll look to wrap up now. I've got a couple more slides just to go through. The first one is just to remind everyone about our Laravel white paper. Oh, no, I take that back. First thing is about our next session. So that's in a couple of weeks' time. That's going to be measure twice, cut once, making planning scope of work successful. So keep an eye out in your inbox for all the information for that webinar. Everything we've been speaking about throughout this series of webinars, we cover it in our white paper with a little bit more detail. So please do check that out. You can download it via this QR code. Otherwise, feel free to reach out to us and we can send you a link to that. And that's going to be it from me. So I can say a big thank you to everyone who's joined us. Thank you so much, Ramon, for your presentation. It was really fantastic. And, I'm sure everyone here has taken a lot away from that. Thank you.
Hopefully so. That was fun.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.